There are memories your mind forgets, but your tongue never does. There are stories your grandmother never told you, yet they live in the rhythm of your words, the rise and fall of your sentences, the music in your speech. There are echoes that travel across oceans, surviving time, surviving loss, surviving everything that tried to silence them. This is the miracle of African retention in the speech of the diaspora. The voice remembers what the history books often ignore. The tongue carries what trauma could not steal. And every time you speak, you are revealing traces of a heritage far older than any map, any border, or any modern nation. When the tongue remembers, identity becomes unstoppable. When people were taken from Africa and scattered across the world, they lost names, land, families, and possessions. But language resisted. It bent, it adapted, it shaped itself inside new realities. Yet it refused to disappear. It whispered reminders through sound, rhythm, intonation, and expression. Even when people were forbidden to speak their native languages, the patterns remained. The tongue held on to the memory of home. In music, in laughter, in stories, in jokes, in everyday conversations, the African spirit survived. Today, whether you hear it in African-American vernacular English, Afro-Caribbean dialects, Afro-Brazilian expressions, or the speech of Black communities worldwide, you can still feel Africa breathing through every syllable. This is not coincidence. This is survival encoded into sound. The remarkable thing about language is that it carries identity even when the speaker is unaware. You may not know the village your ancestors walked in. You may not know the name of the river that fed them. You may not know the stories they told around fire or the music they danced to under the moon. But your tongue, your voice, your rhythm, they remember, they inherit, they protect. Linguists call this retention, but spiritually, emotionally, and historically, it is deeper than a term. It is the evidence that you belong to something bigger than the place you were born. You belong to a lineage of memory carriers, identity holders, and story preservers. And that lineage speaks through you. Listen carefully to the speech of the diaspora, and you will hear patterns rooted in African languages. Call and response, a form of communication born on African soil, still shapes everything from conversation to music, to preaching style to everyday humor. Tonal influence, the rise and fall of pitch giving meaning, still colors sentences in ways that make Black speech instantly recognizable around the world. The repetition of phrases, the rhythmic layering of words, the expressive delivery, the emphasis placed on certain syllables, all of this echoes languages spoken thousands of years before colonialism, before the slave trade, before the world tried to redraw the map of humanity. The tongue remembers even when the mind thinks it has forgotten. Every time you say, "You good," or "Let me tell you something," or "I'm about to," or "He over there acting crazy," you are using structures rooted in African grammar, patterns that existed long before English ever entered the conversation. When you drop a copula, stretch a vowel, double a negation, or add rhythm to a sentence, you are not speaking incorrectly. You are speaking historically. You are carrying the imprint of ancestors whose languages shaped the very foundation of global speech, but were never credited for it. Yet your tongue keeps the receipts. It holds on to the proof. This is why no one can erase who you are. Your identity is not only in your skin, it is in your sound. It is in the way you speak, the way you express emotion, the way you narrate your experience. You are proof that even uprooted trees grow again if the roots remain alive. The diaspora is not a community without memory. It is a community whose memory lives in the bloodstream of speech. And when you begin to recognize this, you stand taller. You speak with more pride. You understand that you are not lost. You are connected. You are not separated. You are extended. You are a branch of a very ancient tree still growing across continents. There is a unique power in knowing that your voice is not an accident. The way you speak is not random. It is the result of generations who fought to retain dignity through sound. They preserved their identity not through books but through speech. They wove history into tone, encoded resistance into rhythm, and embedded pride into every evolving expression. Even the slang of the diaspora carries centuries of African creativity. Slang is not just street talk, It is the continuation of linguistic innovation born on African soil. It is the proof that language is alive, adapting, reshaping itself, but never forgetting its source. When the tongue remembers, you begin to understand the value of your voice. You begin to see that your way of speaking is not something to apologize for. It is something to honor. It is a masterpiece shaped by the pressures of survival and the genius of adaptation. It is a living archive, a breathing museum, a cultural heartbeat passed down through generations without ever needing ink or paper. Your ancestors may not have spoken your language, but you are speaking theirs without knowing it. That is the continuity of identity at its highest level. This understanding invites you to listen differently, not only to your own voice but to the voices around you. When you hear elders telling stories, you are hearing Africa. When you hear children inventing new words, you are hearing the future of a tradition that never died. When you hear music, rap, reggae, blues, gospel, samba, soca, dancehall, you are hearing the continent stretch itself across centuries. Rhythm is retention. Intonation is retention. Call and response is retention. Even the way you laugh, the way you emphasize emotion, the way you give nicknames, the way you express frustration or joy, it all carries shadows of ancient patterns that traveled across the ocean and refused to disappear. People often search for identity in places that feel distant. DNA tests, genealogy records, history books, but sometimes your identity is right there in your voice. Your tongue reveals a story that your documents never will. And when you understand that, you stop searching for where you come from and start appreciating that a part of where you come from has always been inside you. Language is one of humanity's greatest treasures because it holds what the world tries to erase. It protects memories that would otherwise vanish. And the diaspora stands as one of the strongest examples of this truth. For centuries, African people faced erasure, cultural erasure, historical erasure, personal erasure, but language became the rebellion. Every phrase spoken in rhythm, every sentence built on African structure, every verbal expression that carried tone or repetition was an act of defiance. It said, "You may take my freedom, but you cannot take my identity." And the tongue delivered on that promise. It remembered. So what does this mean for you today? It means your voice carries more weight than you realize. It means you are part of a legacy that transcends time. It means that when you speak, you are not speaking alone. You are speaking with the power of generations behind you. You are speaking with the blueprint of ancestral memory. You are speaking with a tongue that has survived storms, crossed oceans, endured pain and still carries beauty. You are the living continuation of a language journey that began long before the world even knew how to measure time. You are part of something bigger. You are proof that identity can never be fully erased. And if your speech carries memory, then your life must carry purpose. You have a responsibility to honor the legacy inside you, not only through speech, but through action, through growth, through excellence, through creativity, through self-respect. The same resilience that helped your language survive is the resilience you must bring into your daily life. The same innovation that shaped diaspora speech is the innovation you must use to shape your future. The same memory that lives in your tongue is the memory you must preserve in your choices. You were born carrying a story older than your birthplace, a story richer than any textbook, a story written not on pages but in sound, rhythm, tone and pattern. And the world needs to hear that story, not only through what you say but through how you live. When the tongue remembers, it reminds you that you are not disconnected, not incomplete, not rootless. You are rooted in one of the oldest, strongest, most creative linguistic traditions the world has ever known, a tradition that traveled through suffering, but survived through brilliance. Every time you speak, remember who you are, remember where your voice comes from, remember what your speech carries. The tongue remembers so that you never forget. The tongue remembers what the mind forgets. And this truth becomes even more powerful when we look at the journey of African descendants across the world. Long after documents were burned, long after names were changed, long after families were separated, long after languages were forbidden by force, something deep within the human voice refused to be erased. A melody stayed, a rhythm stayed, a pattern stayed. The words may have shifted, the grammar may have adapted, and the accent may have transformed, but the soul of the speech remained rooted in the mother continent. Even when people forgot the villages they came from or the stories that once shaped their childhood, their tongues carried memories hidden beneath every syllable. It is a remarkable thing to realize that the sound of a voice can carry more truth than the written records of history, that cadence can act as a living archive, and that speech, something so ordinary that we often overlook it, can hold the last remaining proof of a people's origin. And this is why diaspora speech is not broken English and never has been. It is the preserved heartbeat of a people who refuse to disappear. It is a coded survival tool crafted under pressure, molded by pain, yet shaped with extraordinary creativity. When African descendants speak, laugh, sing, debate, or tell stories, they are drawing from a linguistic reservoir much older than the countries they live in today. Their speech holds echoes of ancestors who shaped continents, built civilizations, and understood the world through a language of tone and rhythm rather than strict mechanical structure. This is why even children who have never visited Africa instinctively use patterns, call and response, tonal emphasis, lyrical inflection, that mirror speech traditions thousands of years old. There is no textbook that taught them this. No classroom forced them to memorize it. It is the unconscious memory passed from voice to voice, generation to generation, encoded in the very fabric of breath. The power of this retention shows that culture is not fragile, it is persistent. You can scatter a people across oceans, but you cannot silence their root. You can forbid a language by law, but you cannot erase the instinct that shaped it. You can remove a person from their land, but you cannot remove the land from their tongue. And it is this inheritance that turns diaspora speech into something more than communication. It becomes identity. It becomes resilience. It becomes proof that even when the mind forgets, the body remembers. Every accent carries history. Every expression carries meaning. Every creative twist of language represents a people refusing to lose themselves. This is why you hear rhythm in Black speech. This is why you feel music inside their storytelling. This is why metaphors flow like rivers and why jokes land with a timing that cannot be replicated. It is inherited artistry. It is ancestral memory breathing through modern work, and the world imitates it without fully understanding that they are copying the echo of something ancient, something beautifully preserved, something never meant to fade. This should remind every person of African descent that they are more connected to their heritage than they realize. You may not know your tribe, your original language, or the exact path your ancestors walked, but your tongue remembers it for you. When you speak with passion, when you articulate with rhythm, when you express with boldness, you are honoring voices that shaped continents long before history attempted to silence them. You are carrying a line of survival encoded not through documents but through sound. And this is why your speech matters. It is not simply casual slang or regional flavor. It is a cultural fingerprint. It tells a story about where you come from and who you are, even if you were never taught it directly. The ancestors did not fail you. They did not disappear. They live in your sound. They live in your phrases. They live in your linguistic instincts. And every time you step into your truth, every time you embrace your voice without shame, you are continuing a legacy of resistance, intelligence, and identity. The world has often misunderstood diaspora speech, judged it, mocked it, tried to correct it, but none of those reactions change the fact that it is built on a foundation of genius. It is flexible, creative, expressive, and adaptive qualities that come directly from African linguistic structure. What others call slang is often innovation. What others call incorrect grammar is actually the influence of languages that use tone and context instead of rigid syntax. What others label improper is in reality deeply rooted cultural retention that refused to die. And when you understand this, you begin to speak with pride, not apology. You begin to realize that your linguistic style is not a flaw, it is a signature. It is a reminder that even when history tried its hardest to disconnect you, you remained connected in the most powerful way a human being can be connected, through the voice. Every accent, every phrase, every linguistic twist in the African diaspora carries an old intelligence. These behaviors were not consciously taught, they were unconsciously held. The body remembers trauma, but the tongue remembers culture. And when people across the world speak in similar tones, melodies, and patterns without ever meeting, it reveals that heritage is not erased by distance, It is encoded in the soul. This truth becomes even more powerful when you realize that millions of people who were scattered across continents, separated by oceans, stripped of possessions and denied access to their own history, still speak echoes of the same rhythm. That is not coincidence. That is inheritance. It is the living proof that identity does not disappear simply because the world tries to bury it. It fights its way back into existence through sound, flow, and expression. When you listen closely to the speech patterns of African-descended people across the diaspora, whether in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in South America, or in the islands, you hear something more than vocabulary. You hear survival. You hear memory that refused to die. You hear the residue of languages that were never written down yet live inside the bones of generations. These linguistic traits are not imitations, they are continuations. They are the living threads that connect the past to the present, even when the speaker has no idea where the connection began. It is the way certain syllables stretch, the way tone rises and falls, the rhythm of storytelling, the musicality of everyday conversation. All of it reveals a cultural memory working quietly beneath the surface. This unconscious retention shows us that culture is more durable than we imagine. It does not rely solely on textbooks, ceremonies, or visible traditions. Sometimes it hides in the smallest details like the cadence of laughter, emphasis on certain words, or the communal way people use language to include others. For many people in the diaspora, these behaviors were passed down not through instruction, but through instinct. A child hears a grandmother speak with a particular musicality, and years later, without realizing it, that same musicality appears in the child's voice. A community grows up speaking with a rhythm that mirrors communities thousands of miles away whom they have never met. When you recognize this, you realize that language is not just a tool, it is a vessel that carries ancestors inside it. There is a special kind of strength in understanding that what you say and how you say it is part of a legacy much older than you. It gives weight to your voice. It reminds you that you are not simply a product of your environment, but a continuation of something deep. The tongue does not forget its origins. It simply adapts to new landscapes while keeping its foundational markings intact. This is why people across the diaspora can feel familiar to each other even before exchanging names. There is a shared linguistic warmth, a shared energy, a shared essence that ties strangers together in a way nothing else can. It is as if the tongue is whispering, "I know where we come from," even when the conscious mind does not. When we take a moment to appreciate this, we begin to understand how powerful linguistic memory truly is. It is not about romanticizing the past, but recognizing the resilience of the human spirit. Even when history tried to separate people from their identities, the voice carried remnants of what was lost. Those remnants became clues, clues that scholars study today, clues that ancestors preserved without ever writing a single word. This is why linguists can trace certain speech patterns, intonations, and grammatical structures back to Africa, even in communities that never had access to the continent's languages. The tongue kept what the hands could no longer hold. What makes this even more remarkable is that these unconscious behaviors form a kind of unity across the diaspora. People who grew up in different countries under different cultures with different experiences still carry echoes of the same linguistic DNA. Whether it is the call and response style of communication, the rhythmic storytelling, the expressive gestures paired with speech, or the creative formation of new words, these patterns appear again and again. They reveal that heritage is not just something you inherit, you embody it. It comes out in your voice before it comes out in your awareness. Understanding this truth builds confidence. It strengthens identity. It reminds you that you come from people who refuse to disappear. Their languages may have been suppressed, but their linguistic instincts lived on. They carried tones, patterns, structures, and rhythms across oceans without even knowing they were doing it. They passed them to their children not through lessons but through presence. And generation after generation, the tongue remembered what history tried to silence. This is why the way you speak matters. It is not just communication, it is history. It is not just conversation, it is connection. It is not just sound, it is survival encoded in every vibration. Your voice is an archive, Every syllable carries weight. Every phrase carries traces of a civilization that reached through you so that it could continue living. And when you recognize this, you begin to speak with a new sense of dignity. You begin to understand that your voice is older than your age. Your speech is deeper than your environment. Your tongue is more powerful than you know. When the tongue remembers, it gives you back what the world tried to take away. It restores pride. It rebuilds identity. It reconnects you to people you've never met. And it reminds you that even if history is interrupted, culture is never fully broken. It hides in the breath of a sentence, in the swing of a word, in the rhythm of your everyday speech. And whether you recognize it or not, you are carrying something sacred every time you open your mouth to speak. Diaspora language is a living archive, a quiet witness that has traveled across oceans, endured oppression, and survived generations of separation from the homeland. It is evidence that memory does not always live in books or monuments. Sometimes it lives in the tongue, in the rhythms of speech, in the tones people use without knowing where they came from. When people across the diaspora open their mouths to speak, they reveal traces of ancestors they never met, villages they have never walked through, and traditions they were never formally taught. Yet somehow these echoes survived inside them. This is the power of linguistic memory, the kind that stretches deeper than conscious thought, deeper than written history, deep into the soul of a people who were forced to adapt, resist, and rebuild themselves in unfamiliar lands. It shows that identity, when rooted strongly enough, does not disappear. It hides, it bends, it reshapes, but it does not break. There are phrases spoken today in the diaspora that feel natural, normal, almost casual, yet their structure mirrors expressions found in West African languages. The cadence in the way a sentence rises, the musicality in the tone, the emphasis placed on certain words, the rhythmic call and response patterns in conversation, all these are not coincidences. They are inheritance. They are the fingerprints of ancient communication styles encrypted into everyday speech. Even when people believe they have lost everything, the tongue remembers. It holds pieces of culture the same way a seed holds the memory of the tree it can become. People may lose their names, they may lose their land, they may lose their recorded history, but the human voice refuses to let go of its roots. It carries them forward like a messenger traveling through time. What makes this so remarkable is that much of this retention is unconscious. People did not sit down to study their ancestors' languages. They did not try to mimic old expressions. Instead, rhythm, tone, and structure passed silently through family lines, through communities, through shared struggle and survival. In plantations, in ghettos, in cities, in rural regions, the African voice found ways to live. It fused with new languages, reshaped old ones, and created entirely new dialects that carried echoes of the past. This is why scholars today can listen to certain patterns in African American English, Caribbean dialects, or Brazilian Portuguese Creole and trace them back to regions in Africa with astonishing accuracy. What survived was not only vocabulary but worldview, communication style, cultural instinct. People did not just speak, they spoke with the memory of their ancestors speaking through them. This story is not only historical, it is deeply motivational, because it shows that identity is stronger than oppression. It reveals that a people can be displaced, scattered, and attacked, yet still maintain a sense of self that resurfaces generation after generation. It proves that no amount of force can truly erase what has been written into the human spirit. Every linguistic pattern that survived the Middle Passage is a testament to resilience. Every shared phrase across millions of people in the diaspora is evidence that something unbreakable existed long before struggle began. The voice did what the body could not. It traveled freely. It refused to be chained. When you understand this, you begin to see the diaspora differently. You begin to see it not as a scattered group of unrelated communities, but as a network of voices carrying the same ancient pulse. You start to notice how a joke told in Jamaica carries the same timing as a joke told in Ghana. You hear the same rhythm in the way people in Trinidad argue as you hear in certain villages in Nigeria. You notice the storytelling style in African American culture that matches griot traditions in West Africa. You hear the drums even when no drums are playing. You hear home in places far away from home. It is as if the ancestors placed something inside the tongue itself that would resurface no matter what distances existed between people. This is why speech is more than communication. It is identity, memory, and inheritance woven into sound. This should remind every person in the diaspora that they are more connected than they realize. Even if you do not know your lineage by name, your voice knows where you come from. Even if you have never stepped foot on African soil, something in you has carried its imprint across time. Even if you were never taught the languages of your ancestors, the patterns still live in your breath. This truth is empowering because it shows that identity is not dependent on perfect historical knowledge. It is not dependent on access to old records. It is not dependent on what was lost. It lives in what survived, and what survived is more than enough to build a future upon. When people understand the resilience of their own voice, something changes inside them. They begin to speak with more confidence. They begin to trust their instincts more deeply. They begin to feel pride in something they used to overlook. They begin to realize that every time they speak, they carry an entire continent of memory within them. They begin to see themselves not as isolated individuals, but as living chapters in a much larger story. And when you know that you are part of a story that has survived for thousands of years, you walk differently. You speak differently. You believe differently. Diaspora language is proof that the African voice did not disappear, it evolved. It did not shatter, it spread. It did not weaken, it adapted. And in that adaptation lies one of the greatest lessons the world can learn. Identity is not defined by what happens to you but by what survives within you. The survival of these speech patterns is not only historical evidence, it is a message. It says you are stronger than anything that tried to silence you. It says you come from a people who refuse to lose themselves. It says your voice carries more history than any textbook could ever contain. And so when someone in the diaspora speaks today, they do not speak alone. They speak with the weight of ancestors behind them. They speak with memories older than their lifetime. They speak with patterns shaped long before their birth. And whether they realize it or not, every word they speak is proof that identity, when rooted deeply enough, can travel across oceans, survive centuries, and emerge again as strong as ever. There is no force greater than a voice that remembers.